We
Gotta
see
push it
us.
back.
See us. Oh. Oh, there you are. Oh, Brian, there's Brian. Hi, Brian.
Just want to welcome you all. There's a precedent being set here, and we're really excited about it. This is the first ever brown bag at Arnold, and we hope this becomes a tradition at this campus for many years to come. It's my very last brown bag, so this is my farewell. But I'm very thankful to Chris and Dane for agreeing to be our guinea pigs up here. So they're going to lead the way. They've got a lot to show us, so we're going to get started as soon as possible at the end. Hopefully there'll be some time for questions, but feel free to just interject whenever you need something explained further. So have fun. Go ahead, Jens.
I'm going to start off with handing out a handout for my portion of the presentation, and then we'll go second. Good afternoon.
Hi.
How you doing? I'm Chris. I'm going to get started in a second here once my PowerPoint is up on the screen. Do you need to hit something to do that, or?
You need to hit computer on.
Okay. All right, so today we're going to talk about media and interaction, how to spark and maintain student interest. I'm Christopher Schmersaw, and Dane Muckler is my colleague and friend, and he will be going secondly. I'm talking about interaction, and Dane will be covering media.
Try a double.
Okay, so first of all, I wanted to start off with this movie clip that kind of demonstrates some things that we should be doing and should be doing in teaching.
Representative, an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone, the Great Depression, passed the, anyone, the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar...
All right, so the clip kind of continues on like that for the duration. So what is Ben Stein doing right here, and what is Ben Stein doing wrong here? So let's start off. Is he doing anything right?
He's questioning in the middle of his...
He is asking questions, but he's asking them kind of rhetorically. So he's not giving the students an opportunity to engage in class discussion and engage in the class material. He also seems to be pretty expert at his subject and seems to be teaching the right subject matter. But again, he's not engaging the students, not reading their body language and responding to that. And also he's talking in a droll and monotone voice.
And not giving him time to answer.
Yeah, exactly. He's not really giving them a time to process or answer. Good. So what we want to do to try to avoid this as a quick tip is to show interest. So the teacher will lead his or her class, and not just in teaching content, but the teacher's mood can also lead his or her class's moods. So bad moods are contagious, and good moods are also contagious. So if you're apathetic about your subject matter, so I teach Comp 1. If I come in and I'm apathetic about English grammar, I'm pretty certain my students are going to be apathetic too, because I have a hard enough time getting them interested in that already. If I come in and I'm excited about the subject matter, that can rub off, and the students can become interested too. We also want to be sure to modulate our tone of voice, so don't talk in a monotone, and also move around a little bit when you can. If you can help it, don't hide behind your computer. So I know certain classes are very technologically intense and you need to utilize the computer. But it's best to be out in front of everybody and also smile to let the students know you're in a good mood. And then nonverbal cues here. So the teacher has nonverbal cues that they're telling the class whether they're interested, whether or not they like the subject matter and like being there. So smile, try to maintain open body language. Don't kind of, cross your arms and look down at your feet. try to look at your students and look them in the eye. Also with body language, we can infer from how the students are acting whether or not they are engaged and interested or even understanding for that matter. So, beyond those tips, we're going to talk about specific interactive models. And these are the benefits of the model. We have higher levels of information retention when you use these models because you're providing an engaging environment for the students. So when the students engage in that material and work through it on their own, they're kind of discovering the information themselves instead of it being just handed to them. And since it's unusual or unique activity, they're much more likely to remember it. Another great thing about interactive models is you have an assessment opportunity. So instead of, lecturing at the class and people taking notes, you're able to walk around the room and see how people are processing the concepts and the information, and anywhere they might have difficulties or gaps with that information. And this last one here, which is probably one of my favorites, is repeatability. So once you create an interactive model or an interactive prompt, hey, you can use that in your other classes, or you can use that in semesters down the line. Now sure, you probably are going to want to fine-tune it or tweak it a little bit, but that's a lesson that you have done and ready for you. So here are the different grouping strategies. We have standard group work, which we're really not going to talk about today. Just having students come together and work on assignments or projects. We have this four-corner strategy, we have the jigsaw strategy, and then we're going to talk about some novel discussion methods. Now, has anyone in here utilized four corners or jigsaw at all? You have, good. So when we get to discussion later, hopefully you'll have something to offer there. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is four corners. The four-corner strategy is a cooperative teaching and learning strategy that inspires students to take part in group activities. It is most suitably used when students are lethargic and need some meaningful physical movement in order to refocus. So yes, definitely, this makes the students get up and move around. I teach an 8 o'clock Comp 1, I taught it last semester, I taught it this semester. And you can bet that those students are groggy and tired, and this is a great way to get them energized and focused. This is also going to help develop critical thinking skills, because they're going to have to think about the information on their own and communicate with each other. Decision-making skills, so deciding either what position they want to take or what's important to share, and then verbal skills, because they will be presenting the information and discussing it with other students. So implementing four corners. There's a couple different methods you can do here. The first one I'm going to talk about has to do with maybe controversial issues or issues where there might be multiple sides. Think of four more options concerning a particularly controversial topic. Then you can label four corners of the rooms with the options. Hand out 3x5 cards to each student, and then the students will jot down their choice. And you give them a few minutes, and you ask the students, what did you choose? After the students articulate their choice, you have them write down a reason for that choice, and then you have them gather in the corner of the room corresponding to what they choose, or chose. In each corner, students from groups of 3 or 4 each form groups of 3 or 4 each to discuss the reasons for selecting a particular choice. So those groups are going to come together, they're going to discuss why they came up with their choice or choices, and then that's going to help them bolster their own position, which they will then have to share with the class later. So you allow time for that discussion. After discussion, students may be randomly called upon to share their views. I actually prefer it that every group has to share their views, so that way I'm making sure everyone presents. You can also use poster board or whiteboard. I prefer that my students use the whiteboard so that they put it up in front of the class and then have to talk about their position, and then I as a teacher kind of moderate that. So if they are missing information or have a weak argument or a particularly strong argument, I will point that out to them. And then afterwards you can resume class. Variations on this. So you can use course concepts instead of controversial issues. I like this a lot, especially when I come into a class and I see all the students are kind of dead in their seats. So what you can do is take a textbook, so say for instance I had a reading for that week or that day of lecture. And in one of my chapters, students had to read about, let's say, irony, tone, mood, and style. So those are the 4 subjects they'd have to read about for that day. Then we'll create 4 groups and have students go into 4 groups, and each group will handle a specific concept. Another thing I like to do is have them number off, so don't allow them to self-select their groups. because I found that when they self-select, you oftentimes have cliques or people who are good friends join groups, and then they don't do what they're supposed to. After they sit down, they're going to take notes, go through the textbook, do some very close and critical reading, and then they will have to outline their notes on the whiteboard. As they're creating the notes, I'll go around and offer suggestions, look them over, make sure the information is good. Once they go up to the board and they share their notes, as they're sharing that information, I will ask questions to prompt them in the proper direction so they cover the material that would be covered in lecture or that's covered in the book. And then also afterwards, if they missed anything, I would fill in those conceptual gaps and give a brief bit of lecture before we move on to the next group. So Four Corners encourages conversation, boosting higher level thinking. You have those students talking about the concepts, and also critical reflection through communicating knowledge and understanding the topic. So they have to reflect on the material that they've read or talked about in order to decide what is important to share with the class. And also, as far as being the teacher there to go around and look, you make sure that they understand what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what is correct, and what is incorrect. Students definitely develop presentation skills with this because they have to present. Lethargic students have to move around, so they have to get up and move. They also have to interact with people they wouldn't normally do, so that can help energize them. And this is also a forced choice activity which can apply to a variety of subjects. So you're forcing them to make a choice either about their controversial topic or making particular choices about the information that they're going to include in their presentation. So here's some of the research that backs up the Four Corners method, and also as we go into Jigsaw, this is applicable there as well. So research has shown that individuals retain 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see, 50% of what they see and hear, 70% of what they hear, say, and see, and then 90% of what they hear, say, see, and do. So the combination of sensory inputs or input makes this a powerful teaching tool. So the next thing we're going to talk about is Jigsaw, and there's definitely some similarities between Jigsaw and Four Corners, but this has a couple of teams that must be formed. So in this method, students work in 4 or 5 member teams. All students read a common narrative such as a book, chapter, a short story, or a biography. Each student receives a topic on which to become an expert. Students with the same topic meet with expert groups to discuss them, then return to their teams to teach what they have learned to their teammates. So I break this down. I could talk about this, and for those of you who are here, I handed out the prompt I use in class to do this. So first of all, I have students count off, because again, I want them working with different people. Students join those with the same number. So I'll have 4 teams, so students go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Group 1 will have a concept, Group 2 will have a concept, Group 3 will have a concept, and Group 4 will have a particular concept. The students must then become experts on that idea, and this is tested through some kind of activity I have planned. So in my prompts that I use in my class, I do an MLA Jigsaw activity. The first group needs to create a works cited page for Handbook for Writers. Then the second group needs to create an example of in-text citations of quoted materials. The third group formats a summary or a paraphrase, and the fourth group formats a block quote. Once I've seen all groups have mastered their concept and have completed that activity, then I have each individual group number off again, and then I form 4 new groups. So after they finish their first activity, I have them form 4 new groups, and each group should have at least 1 expert from each concept in it. Then the students are given a second activity where they must collaborate and share the knowledge. So this is an opportunity for those students to take a leadership position and to share their information with fellow students to help teach other students. And also, peer pressure works positively here because there's this idea of accountability. If you didn't do what you were supposed to in that first activity, or if you're unable to in the second activity, you can bet that the other students are going to be kind of frustrated with you. So that's a real incentive for the or a real incentive and social pressure for the students to stay focused. The activity that I use to test all of these expert concepts in collaboration is I have the students write a short essay, which includes a works cited, a summary or a paraphrase, a quotation, and a block quote. Now, I recognize that when 4 people write one essay, it's not going to be very good. So I don't tell them, okay, I'm really looking for deep critical thought here. What I am looking for is that they've mastered these concepts and they've incorporated them in the appropriate way. The other thing I do is I make sure that the experts aren't just doing that portion of the assignment for their group. Because one of the potential things that could happen with this is people just hand a piece of paper around and one expert does one activity and one expert does the next. No, everybody must do this collaboratively. And one way that I found to kind of avoid that is have each group has one person that writes the essay while everyone else kind of talks or hands them notes. So that way, everyone's sharing in the learning and the doing of all aspects of the second part of Jigsaw. So now we're going to talk about discussion methods, and I'm sure most of us employ discussion, but there's a few kind of different approaches that you can use that I actually learned about as I was doing research for this presentation. So discussion methods stimulate imaginative and conceptual thinking. They encourage active participation. You need to utilize empathy to control and guide class discussion, so making sure material is appropriate for the students are understanding, and that the discussion is couched in such a way that people feel comfortable discussing. When planning, specify the object, so what do I want students to learn or understand after we've done the discussion, and also along with the empathy, examining the needs and backgrounds to make sure that the discussion is contextualized properly for the students to understand it, and also that you create an environment that isn't hostile or negative in any way. So, ensuring participation discussion. Eye contact is important to establish and determine participation. It's a good indicator if you want someone to talk. You can kind of look them in the eyes, or if you see that they're hiding back. If you see someone's looking around or fiddling with something at their desk, you might call on them to add a discussion to make sure that they're participating. We have 2 different sitting patterns that can be utilized depending on your situation to also help bolster the level of participation. So for a centralized pattern, and these are the patterns in which the teacher takes an obvious, authoritative, and leadership role in the class discussion. The strongest of which is probably the wheel pattern. So in this pattern, you'll have the students sit in a circle around the room, and the teacher sits in the middle, preferably in a swivel chair. Otherwise, you're going to have to be craning your neck behind to see the people behind you. And you kind of turn around the room, allow people to talk, and you can look at them in the eyes or call on specific people. The chain method, it can be a square or it can be a circle or any other pattern. Basically, you just have people sit around the room as in links of a chain. And then we have the Y pattern. This is actually something I just learned, and it seems like it could be really interesting. So in the Y pattern, you have 3 groups of students on each of these line segments of the Y. So this would probably work best with some kind of debate or issue that people will hold different and strong opinions on. The teacher sits in the center, and then we'll say, in this section, there's a group of students who are strongly for an issue. In this section, we have students who are strongly against an issue. In this section, we have students that have taken some middle position. What we're going to do is we're going to have those students kind of talk and formulate their arguments, and then they're going to have a debate between the groups. The teacher is going to sit in the center here and allow each different group to take particular turns. We're also going to referee this, so if somebody says something that strikes back directly at someone else, the teacher can say, group 1, do you have anything to say to this objection, or in light of this objection? So the teacher's role is to initiate the conversation, to manage the conversation, to make sure you're staying focused, and also to referee. So that refereeing, making sure that people are arguing or debating in the right kind of ways, that they're not being hostile to one another, certainly. but also acknowledging when students have made very good points, and also if maybe they're a little bit lacking, point out those flaws in a way that really isn't negative, it's more kind of nurturing. Be like, you know, you had some really great thoughts there, you had these really strong premises, but your conclusion was a little off, and this is why. And then also at the end, summarizing the positions. Decentralized sitting patterns is where no one is positioned dominantly. The teacher is the initiator, so gives topics. The teacher may lead or guide, but also, or students may as well. So this works best in a kind of class discussion that's maybe more elevated. So either the students have really mastered the concept, maybe it's a higher level elective, or it's just something that students are really passionate about and you know that they're going to want to talk about. It's an opportunity to kind of give them their moment to guide the class discussion. Now that being said, this teacher still needs to watch out for tangents or things that are really off base from the lesson plan. So I want to end with some effective discussion tips. I'm going to organize discussion topics, talk less, allow the students to participate more, watch out for logical drifts, so keep it focused. Also, give occasional pauses to allow students time to digest. So I'm sure most of us have had those uncomfortable silences in class, or we're having a discussion, or we start a discussion, and we think we have this really great discussion question. And class is going along, and we ask the question, and there's just dead silence. Well, one way to avoid that is after a particular point, stopping and allowing the students a minute or two to think, tell them that they need to write something down, maybe a short paragraph to summarize. And the other thing you can do is if no one's talking, just have it built in there. I'm going to ask this question, I'm going to give you a minute or two to think about it. I expect all of you to be writing notes or writing a summary of your thoughts, and then we're going to go on to the discussion. If you can, know the students' names, because nothing works better with a sleeping student or a student who's not paying attention as if you call on them by their personal name and ask them to answer the question or share their thoughts. They'll immediately perk up because they know they're possibly going to be called on again. Evenly spread time for each discussion point. A short lecture can be given at the end of discussion to summarize topics, and this is probably always a good idea, is to briefly summarize the topics, to reiterate those important concepts. And I'm sure we all prepare for our discussions, but we should also be making the students prepared, and that will give us a much higher level of discussion because they should have, if they haven't mastered the concepts, they should be aware of the information. There's my works cited, and now I'm going to turn it over to Dane. Oh,
Can I ask a
yes.
question? You know, one of the things, all those, you know, that's great, circle and all this kind of thing. If you ever tried to move these tables, it's just ridiculous. I mean, when I have group things, I just have them, you know, sit at a table together or whatever. Because I've tried other things, and by the time you move the tables and the chairs, and it's really hard to do.
You can use
those
the
other
students as
seats.
labor. You can have them at the tables for you. That's what I do.
Right.
Well, that's a good point. So you can use students as labor, get to class early, or maybe don't move the tables, but just move the chairs is something else that you can do. With a Y pattern, you know, it would only take, so if you were in this room, for instance, we'd only have to really shift two of the tables a little one and turn one out, and then we could have all the students move around each table. But yeah, you know, there are going to be mitigating circumstances, so there probably will be situations where just due to a lack of resources or the resources that you have at your disposal that you won't be able to utilize some of this.
Yeah.
Good questions. Anyone else have any other questions?
I have a really quick question, and
Yeah.
this may be opinion because you can probably do it both ways, but if you've done the Y pattern before where you have your, you know, kind of middle ground, strongly for, strongly against, and you have a topic, do you generally let the students, you give them the topic and they choose where they want to sit, or have you ever done it the other way where you just say, okay, I want you to come up with a really, you know, you guys are randomly going to sit here, come up with strong arguments for, against, why you could see both ways. Maybe you do it both ways. I was just curious.
That's a good question. I do debates in my classes, but I've not used the Y pattern because I actually just learned about that as I was doing
It seems
research
interesting.
for this presentation. What I do is I'll poll the class. And if it looks like I'm going to have a fairly even number of people, I'll let them argue for what they want. If it's really uneven, then I will just assign, I'll have people number off, and then they'll randomly get their position based on their number.
Yeah.
Good question. Any others? All right, Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So thank you, Chris, for that presentation. It was very informative. So what I'm going to talk about today, tap down here. So I'm going to talk about today are 4 principles that I discovered through educational psychology. They're just basically 4 principles that you can use whenever you're working with media. So by media, I just mean words and pictures together. So media can include writing on a chalkboard, blackboard. Media can include PowerPoint presentation or videos and animations. So the first discovery, the first principle that I want to tell you about is that words plus pictures are good. So what they discovered is that when you use words and pictures together, you have better retention than when you use words alone or when you use pictures alone. It's especially effective when the words and pictures have to be combined. So when you show pictures that not only illustrate what you're talking about, but where the student actually needs to integrate the picture into the concept that they were talking about. So not only do we get a boost in retention in the studies, but more importantly, I think there's a boost in what they call conceptual learning. So in one research study I looked at, when students were shown pictures of bicycle pumps and the parts of bicycle pumps, not only did they remember more about the individual parts of a bicycle pump in a test, but they were actually better at answering a seemingly unrelated question: can you think of additional uses for the bicycle pump? So this was seen as evidence that there was a deeper understanding, more conceptual understanding. And part of the theory behind this is that when we have more images available to us, there's more information for us to associate between the words and the concepts. We build a more robust neural representation of the information available. And not only does that make it easier to recall, because when the network is larger, it's easier to grasp that information and pull it up. You don't have to remember the word bicycle pump, you could remember the image, right? And that is a cue that brings back the rest of the memory. But also, this richer network allows the individual parts that you've observed, the pieces of the bicycle pump, to then become associated with different concepts, different ideas, and it promotes creativity. So that's the first principle. Whenever you can, put pictures. Sometimes they could just be pictures of what you're talking about. Caveat to this, if you have experts in your field, or maybe you guys would be experts, right? Not so much of a benefit. So I don't expect you guys to benefit so much from seeing this map of the brain. I'm sure you've all seen something like this before. But with students who don't have as much background knowledge, showing them pictures will significantly boost their retention and conceptual learning. The second principle is that people should speak, and the media should either illustrate or animate. So what this means is that it's tempting when you do a PowerPoint presentation or when you are talking to write something on the board or put what you're saying in the PowerPoint presentation. But the research finds that this is redundant and there isn't added benefit either in terms of retention or in terms of conceptual learning. So on your left you have a non-redundant presentation involving how it's how air currents change when they move off of the ocean and into onto the shore. And in one case, the instructor is speaking and showing a slide and letting the image stand for itself, and the student has to integrate the words and the image together. In the other form, the student is both speaking and the words appear on the slide. And so what's interesting is that you'd think there'd be a benefit to putting the words on the slide. It's very tempting to do, you know? But the research was finding that there's really no added benefit. And in fact, it seems to interfere with retention, if not conceptual learning. The reason may be that there's actually an element of distraction. You can process pictures and words at the same time, but you cannot process spoken words and visual words at the same time. Your mind just kind of flits back and forth between the two. So that's the second principle. The third principle is that when you need to use pictures, because sometimes you do, you want to integrate them as much as possible. So you can't see the details here, but this is a geometry problem. maybe a problem you would do in a math class. And you can see that there's information here that needs to be integrated. There's information about the angles and the relationship between the angles. And these are just things that you wouldn't want to speak out loud. Okay, so angle FBE is 120 degrees, angle BEF is 90 degrees. That's confusing. You really do need to put the information up on the board, right? So the question is, can we do this more efficiently? And surprisingly, I find this very surprising, this format is less effective than this format. What you should do when you have to use diagrams with words and pictures, actually physically integrate the words with the relevant parts of the pictures. The reason for this is that the mind is dragged down by having to move from the picture to the words and then back up to the picture. The eyes consume cognitive resources, and there's an overall loss of efficiency. So retention and cognitive learning are better when the students have the words integrated with the image itself. So the last principle I want to talk to you about has different applications. And this is the idea that if you're going to use an animation to show something complicated, so I'm going to return to the bicycle pump example here. There are two different things you can do to improve on the traditional way of showing an animation, or this could even apply to a movie. The traditional way of showing an animation would be, like you show your students the bicycle pump, you show them a movie of how it works, right? And then afterwards you start to explain it. A better way of doing it is to do what they call pre-training. So before you show the animation, you talk about the constituents of the bicycle pump. You talk about the inlet valve, the outlet valve, the piston, the pump, the hose, and the cylinder that contains the air. You introduce each concept and make sure that the student has access to the information about the concept. They'll be able to remember it. Then, and only then, do you show the animation. The animation doesn't introduce any new information, except it allows the student to construct a causal map of how those parts that you already introduced work together. And what the research finds is this reduces the stress on working memory. Supposedly we can only store about 7 plus or minus 2 items in our memory at any one point in time. So the bicycle pump, when you talk about, say, 8 different pieces, and then you add the animation of the bicycle pump itself, that's an overload. But if you introduce the pieces first and then show the animation, then there's less strain on working memory. And an alternative to this that I think we can all use, especially if you're an adjunct and we're short on time, maybe we don't have time to build an actual animation, we can do sort of ad hoc animations that make use of segmenting. So in segmenting, we don't actually have a working animation, but what we do is we have sort of a comic flip book, like I have demonstrated here, where each step in a causal process is illustrated. And what you would do is you would walk your students through each step, and you would show them each image here would be its own slide, and the words down here would be what you'd narrate. So you'd say when the handle is pulled up, and you could show them how the handle would work, then the piston moves up, then the inlet valve closes, and the outlet valve closes. So this is a way to break up your animation and thus reduce the load on working memory. Now these are the 4 principles I learned. I think they're fairly easy to implement, but what I thought when I was looking at all of this, because most of my research was focused on the hard sciences, so things involving computer programming, biology, chemistry, engineering, and automotive. I thought, how do I apply this to my field, which is philosophy? So this could be useful to those of you who work in more social sciences or the humanities. And so I want to show you how I've tried to apply 3 of these principles to my own teaching. The 3 principles I'm going to apply are reducing the total amount of text, using animations to exemplify causal models, and I'm going to try to use the animation effectively using a segmenting technique instead of a pre-training technique. So this is, I just want to introduce you to the topic. In my Intro to Philosophy class, have my students study the Euthyphro dialogue. This is a famous dialogue of Plato that consists about discussion between Socrates, the great philosopher, and the young man Euthyphro, and they're arguing about the nature of piety and morality. And the question is, so ultimately, how is piety or holiness related to being a good person? What's the connection between these 2 things? And Socrates asks this pivotal question. Is the pious loved by the gods because it's pious, or is it pious because it's loved? And my students always say, what the heck is he talking about? Socrates, you're not making any sense. They always say he's talking in circles, and it doesn't make any sense to them. So this is what I used to do. I had this diagram that I created, and I was very proud of myself for having created an image out of something abstract like philosophy. And I had words in it to sort of make my point, and I would talk about it, and these are the about 250 words that I would say in the sort of micro segment on what Socrates is talking about here. So what I want to do is give you the segmented version, where I've broken it up, the animation up in a more structural form. I've removed all the words as well. So the first thing that Socrates says, he's asking Euthyphro, is it possible that it's loved because it's pious? So what is he saying here? So imagine you have some action that's a good act, a morally right thing to do. So like giving to charity, for example. If it's loved because it's pious, what Socrates is suggesting is that the act is good independently of any observer. Nobody needs to see what you're doing to recognize that it's moral. But the relationship between the gods and piety is that you do something good, and then later on they approve of it. So they just happen to be very good at observing moral acts, and they approve of moral acts. It makes them feel good. And that's all there is between piety and love of the gods. Now, what's significant about this for Socrates is that if this is the case, we don't learn anything about piety from being told that the gods love it, right? So the gods are good at recognizing piety, but say so is Bill Clinton, right? He's a good observer of moral judgment. He can tell when somebody does something that's good or something that's bad. So we wouldn't try to explain or define piety by saying, well, pious is what Bill Clinton recognizes as good, right? So that's a problem with that definition. The alternative definition, which is that it's loved because it's pious, pious because it's loved. The action itself has no value at all, right? It's independently of an observer, it is neither good nor bad. But when the gods love it, then a causal act happens. So the loving of it is what makes it pious. And if this is the case, then all it means for an act to be morally good or to be pious is for the gods to approve of it. Now what's the problem with this interpretation? The problem is it makes piety very arbitrary, right? So what if the gods felt very good about, say, snowboarding, right? So now snowboarders are pious, right? And so this doesn't seem to make sense to us. So we want a definition of piety that stands on its own, that isn't dependent on other beings. And in order to get that, Socrates says we need to move beyond this idea that there's a connection between the love of the gods and the pious. And that's my presentation. What I have for you, I'm applying my own principles that I just learned. I've withheld the handout until after the presentation so you can take it with you and hopefully you'll remember what I talked about better, but I hoped it wouldn't distract you. So if you want to, I'll hand out the handout right now, in fact. Great, I guess there's questions. Does anybody have any questions?
So does the animation, is it the same as maybe presenting information on a video clip, that should always be introduced first?
Yeah.
As to what you're going to try, instead of letting the video clip kind of explain and then the students have to process what they're supposed to learn, you're supposed to introduce, so it would be the same as an animation.
Right, so when you show the video clip before you explain, then they have to go back and remember what the video was about in order to put it all together.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right, well, any other questions?
Anyone in Hillsborough?
We can hear you talking, Hillsborough.
You referred to 4 principles, and you said you demonstrated 3. Could
Yes.
you say what the 4 principles actually are?
Right,
please?
sorry, so use words and pictures together whenever appropriate. Instructors should speak, media should illustrate and animate. Integrate text and pictures when text needs to be used. And pre-training or segmenting is better than explaining.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
You're welcome. Sorry, I'll hand down.
They feel like Halloween. I have no real problem.
impressed.
What?
The bag actually made in the United States.
Surprising. Well, a lot of this equipment probably is made in the U.S. because it's more expensive. Hanging out because it's too old. He wants his B-rolls. He's going to get his B-rolls. Because also, you got to get from cashier that deals with Jefferson College and the Student Center and Student Services. So there you go. Let's focus. Yeah, we're going to give him some B-rolls for sure. And we're going to go outside some more after we're doing some of this stuff because you do have to actually, you know.
Why she got it, I don't know.
Yeah, left it on the table.
I'm not getting yelled at.